Hi everyone, welcome to Drafting Diaries, where we discuss 5 things pattern cutting related each month. This month we're going to talk about 5 tools we really love and think every pattern cutter needs. I'm Charlotta.
And I'm Catherine.
And welcome to our video. And to start off, we thought we'd talk about something which isn't really seen as tools, I think, Catherine, but we think it's really important, and it's paper. And it's one of those things I always sort of hear, oh, you don't need to buy paper, just use brown wrapping paper or freezer paper. And I agree, if you're just starting out and you're not quite sure it's a thing for you, just grab whatever at hand, sheets of paper, wrapping paper, Amazon stuffing paper, isn't it? But I think once you're actually really getting into it, paper is actually one of those things, as weird as it sounds, I think is worth investing a bit of money in and getting a roll of paper. Do you agree, Catherine?
I do. And all the manual pattern cutters I've worked with in the industry are very specific about their papers. One place I worked, we had a manual pattern cutter from Japan, and she got them to specially order in some paper. It wasn't from Japan, but it was like a very specific weight. It was very lightweight, so you could see through really easily. And it had no dots and crosses on it. It was totally blank because the couple of pattern cutters don't like the dot and crosses. They find them more distracting actually than anything. But if you are a beginner, the dots and crosses are actually really useful because it helps you to kind of square your lines really well if it's something that you aren't so practiced at. And I've got a roll of dot and cross here actually. Bit of a big one.
Today's a ton, yes.
It's actually half gone, so it's not too heavy, thankfully. But yeah, you can see it's got little dots and crosses on it.
Yeah,
so that's really handy.
I think shall we put some links in for people in the description so they know where to get it from? Because I'm gonna tear something off because mine have so I got cross and dot. I think mine is a bit late darker, but it's more plan. I think.
One.
Yeah, I think that it's too black probably what they sent you. But I actually find it quite interesting because I always hated the cross and dot. Because I agree, if you're just starting out, it's good to know that you're not suddenly like moving at an angle. But I think once you get into really fine work, I always found this distracting because it's too thick. So I've always used the wrong side. And I think everybody I know uses the wrong side. And then it's actually a really good indicator because you know which way down to put your patterns.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
so
agreed.
So I think that's actually a really important point. Whatever way around you use it, always use it the same way, because otherwise you're going to get really confused when cutting out.
Yeah, exactly. And if you get a bit confused between your cutting out, you can always write like right side up, so RSU, just to really clearly be like, this is the right side.
Yes. And of course, but it's the same like you right hand side, left hand side. You can be it's always, I think, worth being really particular. And it's interesting what you said about the Japanese pattern cutter, because I've worked, we had one of the jobs where I was a designer around pattern cutter. Our pattern cutting production team was all in Japan. We had made in Japan, which it's like made in France, isn't it? But it's like one level above. It's so technical and so perfect. It's really nice.
Have you ever looked in a Japanese pattern cutting book? It's incredible. It's so technical. I wish I could translate into English.
Yeah. Oh yeah, because it's even the really famous one, the pattern magics.
Yeah, even those ones.
Yeah, if you just think it's just like, and I used to only get them I think from one shop in London, and they're all in Japanese. So
you've actually got the Japanese ones? Yes, that's awesome.
But it's actually, I think it actually works because you use your brain. If you can't read it, isn't it? You sort of have to use your pattern cutting brain to work it out. But yes, all those
diagrams are great.
Yeah. And what I found quite interesting from I've never worked with them, but I've heard that some of the really big French houses, they don't actually use paper. They use like a paper fabric.
Oh, really?
Maybe it's Bellman. One of my friends who worked for Nina Ricci said that they didn't even work on paper. They sort of had a fabric paper they could draw on, but then they could move it straight onto the mannequin.
Wow, that's awesome.
So I think it costs a lot more, but it has the feel of fabric straight away.
That's amazing, because I always, when I'm making a new pattern, I always well, I work digitally, so it's easier. I can print out a copy of my pattern and then tape it together or pin it together, and I put it on the stand in paper to kind of check the proportions and stuff like that. So if you could do that already, like straight in the like fabric paper, that would be incredible. I'm gonna have to get
because
some.
paper you just can't really see anything, isn't it? You're just roughly checking it's not
Yeah.
this big. But yeah, if it's already like slightly subtle, it always sounded like amazing. But I don't know if it's true. It's, you know, how you hear lots of stuff, but when you don't actually ever see it in real life. But yeah, so that sounds cool. Actually, I was going to say one last thing on paper, because I once felt really frugal. So I ordered the cheaper version of pattern cutting paper. And I think that's the stuff you're talking about, because it's slightly thinner and it's plain and it's actually bigger. It's 1 meter 40.
Yeah.
So it's actually really interesting, because I didn't realize it, and it's half the price, but you actually get a lot more for paper.
Yeah.
And of course, I think, sorry, go on.
I was going to say it's much easier for tracing your pieces. It also, it depends obviously how you draft, but some pattern cutters draft that they copy their block, put all their lines onto it, and then trace all the pieces off of there. And then some people draft that they actually cut into their block. So if you're the type of pattern cutter where you mark all your lines and everything onto your block and trace it off, and you keep that as like a master draft copy, then that thinner paper is great. It's really good.
No, I've always done it, but you have your master copy when you trace around stuff. But I think you also can check straight away whether you're going right. You can always compare it back, can you? If you cut it open, that's just so risky, isn't it?
Yeah, again, this is the great thing about working digital, that I can just copy, have like all my like stage 1 draft, stage 2 draft.
Thousands of PDF files.
Yeah, literally thousands.
And I just wanted to say one last thing and with the wider paper, the thin stuff, that's also really good when you're cutting in chiffon and stuff, isn't it? Because you can layer it, and it's the same with the fabric. You literally just pin it all the way, and it doesn't move while you're cutting it.
Yeah, and it helps you to define that grain as well, because you know sometimes with the slippery fabric you can actually cut your fabric a bit off grain because it's so fluid. If you have the paper, you mark on your 90-degree corner, you know, rip your fabric at a 90-degree angle, selvage and your 90, or pin it down. Yeah.
No. Yes. So these are thoughts on papers. The second thing, which you might get really nerdy now, is measuring tools. So shall we show everybody how many we have?
These are my 3 that I use.
So I've got, yes, mine are so slightly, they always go slightly opaque after a while. But I think you both got this, haven't we? That's probably one I use the most. Yes, which is a pattern master. I think that's quite a British thing.
It is.
Americans sort of don't, I think you have to sort of, I've seen on Amazon, but I don't know if it's just in Britain, but it's sort of, you can get it from between 10 to 20 pounds. And it is great. What I love about it, because I started out with that one in my foundation course, which is a set square. But what's great about the pattern cutter is having the curves and all the parallel lines. But I quite like it because it isn't too complicated. Do you know what I mean? It hasn't got too many lines.
Yeah, so I have a middle set square, which is actually an architect's ruler, and I don't really like using the set square for drafting. Gets, like you said, a bit complicated. There's just so many lines on it. But what I do really like about it is it has millimeter lines. So I can do my 7 millimeter with this. Great, because you can't do that with a pattern master.
I was going to talk about Japanese, and I've got some rulers both from Japan, and they're both, and one from Hong Kong. And they've got both the you probably can't see it at all. They got both the 0.8 and the 1.2 centimeters.
Oh, perfect.
A link in the description below. I've never been able to buy them here. They're called Norai. And when you look on their website, they got about like 30 rulers. It's like paradise.
Oh, that sounds great. I really want to go to Japan and go to a Japanese
Yeah.
stationery.
Yeah, we used to sell it online with Japanese ones, but they stopped it. So the next best thing to Japanese rulers, because they're flexible as well, which is great, is this is actually a quilting ruler, and it's a £5. I think if you buy it online, it's more expensive, but I bought it just in the craft shop. It's a £5, and it's nearly the same. It's got the 1.2 centimeter mark. It's got millimeters, and it's flexible, and it's 50 centimeters. So I think if you're just starting, you think I can't quite say £20, that's quite a good one to start out, and you can get it in your local fabric shop rather than having to go to London or something.
The
Yes.
only thing about the cheaper version of the Pattern Master, the Amazon one, is so it's not got a flat edge. It's not like a square edge here. It's beveled, which means you can't flip it. So when you do your armhole this way and then you flip it.
Yeah.
It's because it's not like a square edge on one side. It's beveled. You can't flip it and do it accurately. But other than that, they're pretty much the same. But for me, that's like a massive issue because that's what I use my curves for armholes. So if you are going to get one and you want to use it for armholes, I would recommend either getting a proper Pattern Master one or the one that I sell on my website. Yeah,
and I think it's quite, because I've always wondered why the Amazon one is so cheap. And I think that you're totally right. I'm left-handed as well, so I constantly use it the wrong way around. So yeah, you definitely need the straight edge. Otherwise, you're just gonna sooner or later you're gonna do it the wrong way around when you're gonna kick yourself because everything is wrong, isn't it?
Yeah, and you'll just like your pencil will just go underneath the bevel.
Yeah. And you have a really nice yellow one. Which one is that?
So this one's a pattern shaper. It's made by the same guys who designed the Pattern Master, and they also, I don't know if they designed the French curve or not, but it's supposed to be like if the French curve and the Pattern Master had a baby, this would be it.
And it's yellow.
And it's yellow, so it's really easy to find on my extremely messy table, which is actually really handy.
But it's actually true, because the see-through ones, you always end up trying to find on the cross and dot paper. So yellow is a fantastic idea, isn't it?
Yeah, it's actually really great. So it's like really similar shape. It's a bit shorter, which is great because this one's 42 centimeters, the Pattern Master, and it's just slightly too big to fit into a standard handbag. Whereas this one,
very important.
The amount of times I've been going to work and I have to take a whole separate bag just for my Pattern Master.
We should do another draft diaries just about the handbags you had over the years. Drafting stuff. And the purses and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But I'll put the link for this ruler in the description as well, because it's a really great one and I have enjoyed using this one. It's fairly new. They've only just released it.
I love all the holes. What are they for? The buttonholes.
Buttons. Yeah, they're buttonholes, which is really great. They've got like a 14 line up to a 44 line, 6 little holes.
And that's great as well, because that way you don't have to buy, well, if you're in industry, because you otherwise, I think of factories, they give you the chart for free, isn't it? But that's always a sort of, so you can match your buttons up.
And just for marking them as well, because I prefer sometimes like a drill hole for production, it's fine. But if I'm doing like sampling patterns and there's not already a garment to follow, I prefer to actually draw my button onto the pattern so it's really clear. So actually to have that circle already on there that I can just be like, perfect. It's great.
Yes, actually, because I was talking to all my Patreons about 12s yesterday. And look, because I have a Japanese 12, and look, their 12 are so beautiful, and they actually, I think with double-sided sticky tape, they stick little buttons on, just so you can imagine how it looks like. So yeah, the buttons are really important.
I do that in fittings actually. If we have the specific button that they want to put on the toile onto the final garment, we get like masking tape. You make a little loop with the sticky stuff on the outside and then stick it to the back of your button, and you can stick your button onto your garment and then you get to see. Yeah.
But no, it's actually really important, isn't it? Because people think, oh yeah, you just stick a button, especially if you make your own clothes. I think you quite often don't think about buttons till the end. But of course, the industry, you decided really early on everything that has to fit, and you can't change it afterwards. So it's sort of quite important to get it right.
Agreed.
So we move on to our next one. So the next time we thought about it, which actually I think goes from pattern cutting to making as well, is scissors and cutters, isn't it? And again, I think we are probably both slightly over top. I'm still collecting.
So I've got one scissor that I use for paper. All my other scissors are not allowed to cut paper. They're really satisfying, they're huge, but they're my old fabric scissors, which I got really blunt and are a bit skew, but they're so sharp on paper. So they're just lovely. I can just like go straight through. I don't have to like do lots of this. I can just skim it straight through, which is great.
No, and I think it's very much because I'm slightly smaller than you. Just because I've got really weak wrists. I ruined my wrist from doing too much manual pattern cutting, or digital pattern cutting. So I can't, I've got one really beautiful pair, really big ones, but they're so heavy. I can do like 2 minutes, and then I'm, my wrist size up. So these, I think they're just the Japanese ones, which are not very expensive.
Yeah.
But they're actually really great. And what I do is, I've got about 3 or 4 pairs, and I get them sharpened from time to time. And then as they start snagging, that becomes the paper scissors. And then I go through the fabric scissors until I've got enough to be sharpened again. Because I think even with fabric scissors, you sort of, on certain silks, you need virgin scissors, don't you? They can't have been used on anything else.
Yeah, agreed. I know some cutters who have like silk scissors, wool scissors, like cotton scissors, different scissors for different fabrics. Out of interest, where do you get your scissors sharpened? Do you send them off?
I either send them off. There's a few companies which do it, which isn't too expensive, and I've also got sharpening tools as well.
Yeah,
but
cool.
It's a bit of practice, but I've got a lot of clippers as well, so I use them for other stuff as well. And that's actually, it's not expensive. It's like £15, so it's worth trying out. But I think for silk scissors, I would get them professionally sharpened, because I think by yourself you can do it for cottons and stuff. But I've got just one pair I keep away, and then I just use it very rarely.
Nice.
Yes, and of course, left-handed, you're slightly more limited with your choice, because I think right-handed, you just.
Yeah. That's true, actually. I never thought about that with left-handed scissors. They're so specialist. There's probably not quite so many on the market.
Actually, one thing we noticed, because I used to teach at college, so you get like 80 people, so scissors get ruined all the time. We actually found, for sort of, if you're just starting out, getting a pair, I think we used to get a pair of 3 for £5, like the most basic craft scissors, and they're actually fine for most fabrics. I wouldn't cut silk with it. But I think rather than even because I think these are like something ridiculous, like £50, the ginger, and then you get Bitley and Sons and Sheffield, which are really nice ones, and I think these are about 20, aren't they? So I would try out the ones for £5 when you're starting out, and then if you really start using silks and special fabrics, then get some expensive ones. Yes.
Yeah, and I think the weight of your scissor is so specific to you as well. It's worth, like you say, like just trying out some cheap ones just to find the weight that you like, because when you buy scissors as well, they usually tell you how much they weigh, because it's really important. Like you said, you can easily ruin your wrists. I know loads of professional cutters who have just wrecked their wrists and hands, and won't use any scissor other than theirs because of that.
And it's sort of a bit like weavers, I think, have the same issue. They wreck all their wrists from weaving. But no, so these are our thoughts on scissors. Okay, for the fourth tool, we're going a bit more specialist, I think, because we're talking about tracers. Oh, yours is very fancy.
I love a wooden handle.
Really beautiful, because you sell them, isn't it? And they're just beautiful, isn't it? Yeah, mine is the stuff still from university. It's really not very nice.
That's the one I used to have, actually. I like the shape of that one because your finger sits in it.
Oh yeah, you're right. But I think it's what I always find they're quite wobbly with the plastic. So I imagine yours as a metal is probably a bit more precise, isn't it?
So, yeah, I mean, it still has a bit of wobble. I think you need that wobble to like get around curves. You need that sort of movement. But I just like the metal ones.
Yeah. Shall we quickly tell people what they're about actually before we start nerding out? Yes, that might be a good idea. So this is called a tracer, and I think we're more specialists because I don't always use it. It's basically when you want, as Catherine said, for example, if you have a master copy on your lines, and when you want to trace out all your pieces, you can either put a piece of paper on top and trace through a line. But if you're working really fine pencil, that's quite hard to see. So another option is to put another piece of paper behind your pattern, and then you just trace your original lines with this tool, and it's got lots of little metal spikes, and it will sort of give you a dotted line on your new piece of paper, which you then can redraw. Is that right? Yes, I hope so.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you can also use them for when you're marking your underlays of darts or pleats, that kind of stuff. If you don't want to cut straight through, if you want to mark them on, you can kind of fold your dart closed and then trace over your stitch line using this.
Oh, yeah.
You can also use them when you're tracing a pattern off of a garment, if you're like copying a garment basically. So often like with trousers and stuff, if I'm tracing a pattern, I use this and I put my garment on top of some paper and then I pin it down in place or weight it down in place, and then I trace over the seams with this, because these ones are so sharp that they actually go through the fabric and they don't mark it. I mean, I wouldn't do it on a silk, but it generally doesn't mark it.
That's actually really good, because I think you can, when you're tracing a pattern, you can do all the darts and pockets and everything, is that, isn't it? That's always where you sort of otherwise have to measure it all, and it takes ages.
Exactly, yeah. Or you have to do it the other way, where you put the paper on top and you like rub a crayon or something over, which I never really find works that well for me.
I just measure everything and then check it at the end. So yeah, but I like your method of tracing. That's really good. Yes, and I've got this one. I don't actually know what this is. I just found it.
I used to have one like that as well, actually. It looks like it wouldn't work, but it actually does. Not through garments, but through 2 layers of paper, it works.
I have to try it out, because it's you know how you collect random stuff and I don't even know where it's from. But yeah,
it's not as lethal as these.
Yeah, I like yours. But what I like about these is like you can start out quite cheap. I think they're fiver. And they are sort of practical. And what I love about them is they're really precise, because especially yours, I think, because yours got a sharper line. So you really get like your perfect pencil line.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. And I think that's actually all we have to say about it. It's like one of those tools. It just does the job, isn't it? And I think you need to be a bit careful, actually. I'm going to say one thing. What I tend to do is, if you're doing a line, for example, and you're going to a bust point, for example, a dart point, I sometimes do a line across, because sometimes it's quite hard to see where your last dot is. Do you know what I mean? So I always tend to mark it as a stop mark, so that I know where it ends.
Yeah, you create almost like a cross.
Yeah.
That you can, agreed, actually. Yeah, I like to do that. And when you're tracing a pattern with straight lines, you don't have to trace the whole line. If you know it's a straight line, you do a cross at the end and a cross at the other end, and then just draw it in. Yeah.
And that actually goes the same for tracing with pencil. I always, if I trace something, if it's straight, it's madness tracing it, or it's much better to just do the end bits.
Yeah, exactly.
Good. Okay, so that's really nice and easy. And the last one is actually going to be all in Catherine's hand, because we're going to talk about notches and markers. And I haven't got any, I have to admit. I think it's because I've always worked for other companies. Yes.
I'll send you some. I have a whole collection.
You've ordered them all. I think they're proper investment pieces, aren't they? They're really good. But I think because we always had them at work, and they are sort of 20. Actually, nowadays they're cheaper. They used to be really dear. I've always used other people's, which is a bit cheapy. But I think if you're getting into it, and especially if you're making a lot of patterns, they're really worth getting. Do you want to tell us why, Catherine?
So they they're just something to speed up your pattern making process. You can obviously mark in notches by doing like a little snip in the paper, or you could do like a little triangle snip out, which a lot of people do. But these are going to speed up the process so much for you. And it means that you can kind of notch through multiple pieces at the same time as well, which is great. And they're essentially just glorified paper punches. This one's probably the easiest one to see kind of how it works. It's got like a little punchy bit there, so you put the paper in between and then you punch it and it creates a little snip through the edge of the paper to mark your notch. And they come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. This is the first one I ever bought, believe it or not. Still looks quite pristine. And then I have these ones as well, which are slightly smaller. So this one's a bit lighter. This one's quite heavy. So I take this one around with me when I'm traveling. And then this is the one that I sell, which again is quite heavy, but really sturdy. And then I have this kind of giant one,
Wow.
which does two things. It does like a normal notch through there, but then it has this circular bit. So it punches a hole through my pattern so I can thread my hook through it, which is great. I was so excited when I found this. I genuinely was like hopping up and down in the studio like, yes!
Because I think it's really satisfying to use, isn't it? It's like there's no force. And I think what I really like about what you said about multiple layers, because with scissors, you tend to sometimes snip too deep. But this, if you go through multiple layers, you have 100% match. And it sort of gives you a really good guide of where you should stop snipping. And I think they always got the 1 centimeter sort of break, haven't it? So you don't go more than 1 centimeter? Or is it 1.5?
I think you get like varying different length ones, and then you also get different widths. So like here's a bit of paper that I've got. I can just snip through there. That's the kind of maximum length that it creates. But most people only go a little bit in. They just do maybe not that small, but we do on sort of that big normally.
Yeah, and I think that's really safe, because this if you just snip it or you mark a line on paper, you always tend to snip the whole thing, isn't it? So you have to really be more precise. With that, it's automatically you stop.
Yeah, it kind of gets an end point to your snip, so you don't snip too far.
Yeah. And then the other sort of puncher we talk about is the one you used for your bust point and dart points, isn't it?
Yeah, so yeah, I do.
Yes, they're really satisfying to use as well, aren't they?
So the notcher marks like external details, external notches, but you know, anyone who sews will know that we need internal details and holes as well, like you said, the apex of a dart or any like pocket details, anything like that. So to do that, we need to punch a little circular hole through our paper, and the most basic one we get is one that looks like this. I always nickname it the mushroom tool because it looks a bit like a mushroom. So you have to actually like push through your paper and twist it, and then it kind of twists a little hole through it. Or you get this one, which is a bit kinder to your wrist. It like automatically twists for you. So you just have to apply pressure and then it twists down for you. It does the same thing. It just saves your wrist a little bit. I know when I've worked in the industry, particularly if you're doing things like pin tucks, so many drill holes. Like I had one piece that had like 50 drill holes in, and my elbow and my wrist by the end of it was just so dead. So again, when I discovered this, I was kind of dancing in the studio.
And I think it is, like you said, it's sort of people always only think of it as dart points, but it's the pocket, it's pleats especially, isn't it? If you want to sort of show whether they're angles or parallel, it's just a really helpful thing to have, because otherwise you're always trying to pin to the fabric and then you have to unpin, which is fine if you have one thing, but if you have multiple pleats, that is such a fantastic tool to have, I think.
Yeah, and basically anywhere where you're thinking to do like a tailor's tag, or if you need to mark anything with chalk, anything like that, definitely use one of these, because you can kind of mark your tailor tags and stuff while your pattern is still attached to the fabric, and then you don't have to go through your pattern, so you're not wrecking your pattern, which will mean your pattern will last longer.
Yeah, and same as pins, isn't it? No, I think it's one of these things that it becomes quite specialist, but they are actually, if you're sort of doing quite a lot, they are really sort of worth getting if it's not.
Yeah, and I think with pattern cutting, you always want to be as quick as possible because it's a long process anyway. So anything you can do to speed up that process is worth doing, and investing in tools is one of the first things you can do to speed up that process.
And I think especially like all the finishing touches, like because the actual pattern cutting that's the nice part, isn't it? But when you come towards the end of it, you just want to get it done, but get it done well. And so anything that gets that stage out of the way, I always think that's a bit like cutting out your actual pattern. That's so boring, but you have to do it beautifully, don't you? Yeah, laying on fabric, it's sort of, yeah.
Yeah, like that finishing stage, like adding seam allowance, marking your notches and everything is just so dull, but very necessary.
Yeah, it's really mundane, but it's probably the most important thing, because if you get that wrong, it's not going to work, isn't it? So yeah.
Yeah, I used to work with a pattern cutter who had like a scalpel blade, like a craft knife, and then they had one ruler that they never used for pattern cutting. It was their cutting ruler, and they would use that alongside, you know how when you add seam allowance, you put on your like ruler with your guideline and you draw. Instead of drawing, she would get her blade and cut like that, and it was so quick. It was amazing to watch, and so
really precise as well, because actually I know we've done rulers and I've taken mine away, but with the Moorplan Pattern Master, it's got quite big lines. So if you're doing really fitted dresses with lots of panels, you are actually, now we're going to get really nerdy, but you actually half a millimeter out, aren't you? Because your line is too thick. So
because they're just over a millimeter thick, aren't they? Which is actually probably a little bit too thick if you think about it.
And I think that's what's great about the bendy rulers, is that they have really fine lines. So you don't have to do that sort of adjustment where you always think it's slightly too big.
Agreed, completely.
I like the scalpel idea. That's a great idea.
You're going to start practicing now, aren't you?
But yes, these are our 5 favorite and probably most practical tools. But we'd love to hear in the comments below, what are your pattern cutting tools? Let us know. And I know it's sort of different by each country, so I would really love to hear what rulers, paper, scissors you use in each country. But that's it for us for today. Thank you very much for watching. Catherine, do you want to tell us quickly where we can find you before we sign off?
So like we said, my name is Catherine. I'm from Project Patterns. You can find me on Instagram at Project Patterns, or on my website. You can find lots of kind of classes and tools and stuff like that. It's www.projectpatterns.co.uk. And I also have a podcast called Fashion Half Cut, which you can find in all the usual podcasting places. And we're also on Instagram at Fashion Half Cut.
And I think you've also talked about tools, haven't you, on Fashion Half Cut?
So yes, we do. Yeah, we have a whole episode about it as well. And my co-host actually went to Japan and went to a Japanese pattern cutting store and spent about 3 hours there. So if you want to hear more about that, you can find that on our podcast.
Yeah, it's a question. Did she go to Japan just for the pattern cutting?
Well, she says no, but I think actually yes.
And I'm Charlotta, and my website is called learn.schoolofpattern-cutting, and you can also find me on Instagram under Charlotta School of Pattern Cutting. But that's it from us for this month. We see you back in April with 5 more things pattern cutting related. Bye-bye.
Bye.